It started as an ordinary night in Milwaukee. The air was heavy with the smell of summer rain, the city lights flickering against the damp asphalt. A man, shirtless, trembling, his wrists still bound by a pair of broken handcuffs, burst out from the shadows of North 25th Street, screaming for help. Residents peeked from their windows, uncertain if it was a drunk, a thief, or something far worse. Minutes later, 2 police officers followed him back to apartment 213. They expected a domestic dispute, maybe drugs, maybe nothing at all. But when the door opened, what they saw inside would haunt them forever. Photographs of dismembered bodies, skulls lined up like trophies, and a refrigerator humming softly in the corner. Inside that fridge lay the truth. Heads, hearts, and pieces of men who had vanished without a trace. And at the center of it all stood Jeffrey Dahmer. Quiet, polite, almost gentle. The man history would call the Milwaukee Cannibal, because sometimes evil doesn't come with a roar. Sometimes it whispers from the apartment next door. In the late 1980s, Milwaukee was a working-class city trying to stay afloat. Steel factories closing, streets half-lit, and people too busy surviving to notice what was happening next door. In one of those aging apartment buildings on North 25th Street lived a quiet man named Jeffrey Dahmer. He was polite, soft-spoken, and always paid his rent on time. To the neighbors, he was just another lonely tenant who drank too much beer and kept to himself. No one imagined that behind his locked door, a nightmare was unfolding. For over a decade, young men from bars, bus stops, and shopping malls disappeared without a trace. 17 of them, mostly men of color, immigrants, or those living on society's margins. Their faces appeared briefly on missing posters, then were forgotten. Inside Dahmer's apartment, the air reeked of decay masked by cheap chemicals. A camera sat ready on the nightstand. Bottles of sleeping pills lined the counter, and a blue barrel filled with acid waited in the corner. Each killing followed a ritual. Seduction, drugging, strangulation, dismemberment, and then the part no one could comprehend: the need to keep pieces of his victims close forever. Police had come to his door before. Once, a 14-year-old boy escaped, bleeding and dazed, only to be returned by officers who believed Dahmer's calm explanation: "He's just my boyfriend." Within hours, the boy was dead. It wasn't until the night of July 22nd, 1991, when another man, Tracy Edwards, broke free from the same apartment, that the truth was finally revealed. When officers stepped inside, they uncovered evidence of one of the most horrifying crime sprees in American history. This was not just the story of a serial killer. It was the story of how evil can hide in plain sight, quiet, courteous, and smiling. I watched.
It was June 18th, 1978, a humid Sunday afternoon in Bath, Ohio. The school year had just ended, and 18-year-old Jeffrey Dahmer was home alone. His parents had separated, the house was nearly empty, and the silence pressed against him like a weight. He wandered the rural road near his house, aimless, clutching a bottle of beer. That's when he saw Stephen Hicks, the hitchhiker, 19, long-haired, carrying his guitar case. Dahmer slowed his car, smiled, and offered him a ride. "You heading to the concert? I've got some cold beers at my place." Hicks hesitated, then agreed. Just another friendly ride from a stranger. At the Dahmer residence, they drank, talked about music, laughed. For a few hours, it felt normal. But as the sun began to sink and Hicks mentioned he had to leave, something inside Jeffrey shifted. He later said, "I didn't want him to go. I didn't know how to make him stay."
When Hicks stood up, Dahmer picked up a 10-pound dumbbell from the floor and swung it hard against the back of his head. The sound was dull, final. Hicks fell. Jeffrey knelt beside him, listening to the faint heartbeat, then pressed the handle of the barbell against his throat until everything went still. The body lay motionless on the basement floor. Dahmer's hands trembled, not with fear, but with fascination. He stripped the body, examined it, then later confessed, "I just wanted to see what he looked like inside." He dismembered Hicks with a hunting knife, placed the remains in garbage bags, and buried them behind the family home. Days later, the smell drew flies. He returned, crushed the bones with a sledgehammer, and scattered them into the woods. To the world, nothing happened that summer in Bath. But in that quiet Ohio house, a line had been crossed. The birth of a killer who would one day make the world shudder. For nearly 9 years after that first killing, Jeffrey Dahmer drifted through life like a ghost. He joined the army, was discharged for drinking, moved from city to city, trying to bury what he had done. But darkness never sleeps for long. By 1987, Dahmer was living alone in a small Milwaukee hotel. He worked at a chocolate factory by day, quiet, efficient, invisible, and spent his nights drinking until the world blurred. On November 20th, 1987, he met Stephen Tuomi, a 25-year-old man at a gay bar downtown. Witnesses said Dahmer was polite, even shy, as he invited Tuomi to share a room for the night. Hours later, Dahmer woke up on the bed, his hands stained red. Tuomi's lifeless body lay beside him. He would later tell detectives, "I didn't remember doing it. I just woke up and he was dead." But even then, panic never came. Only curiosity. He bought a large suitcase, stuffed the body inside, and took it back to his grandmother's house in West Allis, where he was living at the time. While she prayed upstairs, Jeffrey dismembered the corpse in the basement, cleaning, photographing, storing pieces in garbage bags. The same home where he once carved Thanksgiving turkey now hid a darker feast. Neighbors began to complain about strange smells. His grandmother scolded him. He blamed spoiled meat, but Dahmer was already descending again. Deeper, colder. He confessed later, "That's when I realized I couldn't stop anymore." By early 1988, the pattern had returned. Bars, strangers, drinks laced with sleeping pills. That year, he killed James Dockstader, Richard Guerrero, and Anthony Sears. Each death smoother, more deliberate. The monster was back, now methodical, organized, and almost comfortable with what he was becoming. In the quiet Wisconsin nights, while the world slept, Jeffrey Dahmer was learning how to erase a person completely. Body, name, and history. In 1989, after being arrested for drugging a young man, Jeffrey Dahmer was sentenced to 1 year in prison, but served only 10 months. He promised the judge he would change. he didn't. Within weeks of his release, he rented a small one-bedroom apartment, number 213, Oxford Apartments, Milwaukee. The smell hit neighbors first. Something sour, metallic, like decaying meat mixed with chemicals. When they complained, Dahmer smiled, saying it was just spoiled food from the fridge. Inside that locked door, he built his private world. A 55-gallon blue barrel filled with acid, a Polaroid camera, bottles of sleeping pills, and a freezer humming in the corner. He called it my temple. Between 1989 and 1991, 12 men entered that room. None ever left. He selected his victims from bars, malls, and bus stops, mostly young men of color, men who lived invisible lives. He drugged them, strangled them, photographed their bodies in twisted poses. He saved skulls, painted them black, and stored hearts and genitals in the refrigerator. It wasn't about killing anymore. It was about possession, keeping them forever. Neighbors reported the stench to the building manager. Police came twice, even stood at his doorway once. Each time Dahmer greeted them politely, calm and sober, and they left embarrassed. The evil continued, hidden by courtesy. Then came May 27, 1991, the night that could have stopped everything. 14-year-old Konarak Synthesome, a Laotian boy, stumbled from Dahmer's apartment, naked, bleeding, dazed. Neighbors called 911. When officers arrived, Dahmer smiled again. "He's my boyfriend. He just drank too much." Despite protests from bystanders, police handed the boy back to him. Within an hour, Konarak was dead. Later, officers would recall the faint odor in the apartment, the same smell that came from the next room, where another body lay decomposing. Had they looked just a little closer, 15 lives might have been saved. But the door closed again, and for 2 more months, the killing continued. It was a humid Monday night in Milwaukee, July 22, 1991. Inside apartment 213, Jeffrey Dahmer was drinking with a new guest, a 31-year-old man named Tracy Edwards. Like so many before him, Tracy had been promised money for photos. But something felt wrong. The air was thick with chemicals, and on the wall hung a strange blue barrel. Dahmer slipped a handcuff onto Tracy's wrist and smiled. "You're not going anywhere." Then, from the bedroom, he brought out a knife. Tracy's heartbeat thundered in his ears. Fight or die. For hours, he tried to stay calm, talking softly, pretending to cooperate. He waited, watched. When Dahmer's attention slipped, Tracy punched him, ran for the door, and burst into the street, half naked, still in the handcuffs. He stopped 2 police officers, Rolf Miller and Robert Routh, shouting, "He tried to kill me!" They followed him back to apartment 213, expecting another domestic dispute. Milwaukee had plenty of those. Dahmer opened the door, calm as ever, shirtless, eyes distant. He told them it was all a misunderstanding. But when Officer Mueller walked to the bedroom, he noticed the Polaroid camera and a stack of photographs. At first, he thought they were art. Then he realized the poses were impossible for a living man. He whispered, "These are real." Within seconds, Dahmer lunged. Officers wrestled him to the ground, and the nightmare unraveled. They opened the refrigerator and froze. Inside were human heads wrapped in plastic,
hearts and organs stacked like leftovers.
The blue barrel in the corner bubbled softly, filled with acid and human remains. Outside, the night was silent, but the news spread like fire. Within hours, the apartment was surrounded by flashing lights, horrified neighbors, and reporters whispering one name: Jeffrey Dahmer, the Milwaukee Cannibal. The hunt was over, but the horror had only just begun to be understood. When officers called for backup that night, apartment 213 turned into a crime scene unlike anything Milwaukee had ever seen. Forensic teams entered wearing masks. The stench was unbearable. They opened drawers, closets, the freezer. Inside were 7 skulls, bleached and painted, 2 hearts preserved in jars, a human torso dissolving in a blue barrel of acid. 84 Polaroid photographs documented every stage, from living men smiling on the bed to dismembered remains. Detective Patrick Kennedy, who led the interrogation, later said, "He spoke like a man describing a recipe. No emotion, no guilt, just detail." Dahmer sat calmly in the interview room, hands folded, explaining how he had wanted to keep them close. He remembered every victim's name, every position, every photograph. It was not madness. It was method.
As news spread, the city erupted in disbelief. Reporters called it the House of Horrors. Neighbors were haunted by the thought that they had lived beside him for years, hearing strange sounds and smelling death, but never daring to ask. Some broke down crying when police carried boxes of human remains past their doors. The investigation lasted weeks. DNA analysts worked day and night to identify the victims. 17 men, aged 14 to 33. Families waited in agony. Some never got a full body back, only fragments or confirmation from a photo. In January 1992, the trial began at the Milwaukee County Courthouse.
Every seat was filled. Victims' families, journalists, even psychiatrists trying to understand what could make a man do this. Dahmer pleaded guilty but insane to 15 counts of murder. The courtroom fell silent as he described how he drugged his victims, strangled them, and performed acts of necrophilia and cannibalism. Psychiatrists debated, was he a monster or a man broken beyond repair? One doctor testified, he knew right from wrong. He just didn't care. On February 15, 1992, Judge Lawrence Graham delivered the sentence. 15 consecutive life terms, 957 years in prison. The crowd gasped. Some families wept, others whispered prayers of relief. Dahmer simply nodded. I deserve death, he said. I knew what I was doing. In prison, Jeffrey Dahmer lived quietly. He read the Bible, claimed he'd found God, and spent his days cleaning the chapel. But many inmates saw no redemption, only revenge waiting to happen. On the morning of November 28, 1994, at Columbia Correctional Institution, Dahmer was assigned to clean a restroom with 2 other inmates, Christopher Scarver and Jesse Anderson. 20 minutes later, guards found Dahmer on the floor, his head crushed by a steel bar from a weight machine. He was pronounced dead at 9:11 a.m. Scarver later said, God told me to do it. The world called it justice, brutal, poetic, inevitable. After his death, apartment 213 was demolished, The site remains an empty lot, grass growing over concrete, a scar the city refuses to rebuild. Milwaukee moved on, but the name Jeffrey Dahmer became immortal, not in honor, but in horror. To this day, detectives, criminologists, and psychologists still study his case, asking the same question: how many chances did the world have to stop him? And why did everyone look away? When the courtroom lights dimmed and the headlines faded, one truth remained. Jeffrey Dahmer was not born a monster.
He was shaped by loneliness, neglect, and a society that didn't listen. Every warning sign had been there. The dead animals he dissected as a boy, the obsession with control, the isolation. Yet each red flag was dismissed as just strange. The Dahmer case was more than a collection of murders. It was a mirror, reflecting the apathy that allows evil to grow unnoticed. He lived among people, went to work, said hello to neighbors. No one saw the abyss behind his polite smile. Because sometimes we don't want to believe the monster could be real, especially when it looks like one of us. For law enforcement, his story forced a reckoning. It exposed deep cracks in the system: racial bias, homophobia, indifference. A 14-year-old boy was handed back to his killer because officers believed the calm words of a white man over the desperate cries of black neighbors. That failure still echoes through police training today.
For psychologists, Dahmer became a case study in obsession, a man torn between craving intimacy and destroying it. He wanted companionship, but only in silence and control. He wanted love, but feared rejection so deeply that he killed to keep it forever. In one of his final interviews before his death, Dahmer said softly, "I created my own hell. I know I'll burn for what I did. I deserve it." There was no defense left, no mask, only the empty truth of a man who understood too late what he had become. And for the rest of us, his story is a warning. Evil doesn't always come with horns or hate. It can wear a smile, offer you a drink, live just across the hall. It grows in the dark corners we refuse to look at, in the silence of those who choose not to speak. So tonight, as you turn off the lights and the city outside quiets down, remember, monsters don't live in stories. They live in people who stop caring. Thank you for listening to Crimes That Shocked the World. Where are you tuning in from tonight? Are you listening from your car, your bedroom, or on your way home from work? Tell us your thoughts. What did this story make you feel? Drop a comment, share it with someone you care about, and don't forget to subscribe, so together we can keep these stories alive and make sure the world never forgets what happens when we stop paying attention.